Please join me in giving a hearty welcome to Rice's own John Doerr.
Well, John, thank you for coming, and thank you for being so generous with your time and with your book. And the first thing I'd like to ask you about is your time and your book. You've built more than 200 companies. Your time is incredibly valuable. Why did you write a book?
Well, this is so we could get all of these people together tonight. Actually, thank you very much for your time this evening. And I don't mean to evade your question, but I hope that some of the stories in this book are useful to you as they are to others. And I think we're at really a critical moment. I think too many of our leaders and some of our great institutions are failing us. In some cases, it's because they're bad or unethical. You know what I mean. In too many other cases, though, our leaders are leading us to the wrong goals with terrible outcomes as a consequence, and that has got to stop. How we are going to right these wrongs, how we're going to course correct, I think it's one of the great challenges among two challenges for our generation. And I believe a key is in choosing the right goals, getting everybody in our institutions or organizations focused on those, aligned around achieving them, committed to doing them, tracking our progress, and then stretching for amazing. And stretching is perhaps the highest quality of a great goal-setting system. We can look at places where goals have failed us. Look at Theranos. What if they had transparent goals? Look at Wells Fargo. Did they have the right goals? Look at some of our public institutions. I think there's never been a time more than now where it's clear that we need great leaders, great culture in our institutions, and if we have those two, then something like this goal system, it's not a silver bullet, but it can really help take us to the mountaintop. I've seen it happen.
Well, how did you learn about objectives and key results, OKRs? How did you come about learning that?
Oh, that's such a great question. Thank you. I brought some pictures to share with you. I'm hoping I can get this to come up. Here is one long-haired Rice student working on the R2 mainframe. I had a lot to learn then, and I was fortunate to get a job working at a chip company called Intel. I really was out in Silicon Valley trying to find my girlfriend who had dumped me. And she had a job at Intel, hadn't told me that. And so when I got a summer job down the hall from her, she about hit the roof. She was not amused at all. But today we've been married 40 years. And the other great thing that happened to me while I was at Intel that summer is I got to work for Andy Grove, how many of you know Andy Grove? All right. He's been called the greatest manager of his or any other era, Hungarian emigre, came to Silicon Valley with nothing and helped build the greatest semiconductor company that ever existed. And to do that, you had to get thousands of people to get lines that were a millionth of a meter, a micron, exactly right or nothing would work. And so he invented this deceptively simple system called OKRs and taught it to me and others. I got a copy of his original slide set. That's another story. But I want to share with you a classic piece of video. This is not readily available on the internet. This is Andy Grove teaching Intel executives about OKRs. Let's see, if we can make this go. That's what OKRs are. Here he goes. Watch the Hungarian accent.
The two key phrases of the management by objective systems are the objectives and the key result. And they match the two purposes. The objective is the direction. The key result has to be measurable. At the end, you can look and without any argument say, did I do that or did I not do it? Yes, no. Simple.
That's Andy Grove for you. Yes, no, simple. Objectives are the direction. They're what I want to have accomplished. The key results are how. And he called these systems the OKRs. Objectives are the what. Key results are the how. The objectives and the key results. And this system is something that I then took from Andy Grove in Intel every place I went when I left Intel in 1980 to help Kleiner Perkins start new companies.
And so the essence of an OKR, how would you describe it?
What makes a good objective? What makes a good key result? Well, the objectives are long-lasting. They're intended to be truly significant, concrete, action-oriented to be sure, but inspirational. That's what I want to have accomplished. And it may take some period of time to achieve that. Key results, you'll remember, are how I'm going to get it done. And so those are specific and time-bound, aggressive but realistic, and above all else, measurable and verifiable. In fact, as one of my prize pupils, Marissa Mayer, would say, if it doesn't have a number, it's not a key result. Those are objectives and key results.
So I think many of us learn best when we hear stories. Could you tell us a story about one of the companies that's used this successfully? Let's maybe start with Google.
Sure. In 1999, I took this system to 2 Stanford computer science dropouts. They're 24 years old here in their garage. And I showed them Andy Grove's slide set. This is Larry Page, you'll recognize, and Sergey Brin. There were just a couple dozen Googlers. I had just written the largest check I ever had in my life. It was like for $12 million for 13% of Google. It was outrageous. And at the end of my pitch, I said, okay, guys, what do you think? And I was hoping I'd get real enthusiasm for adopting this. Larry didn't have anything to say. What Sergey said was, well, we don't have any better way to manage this company, so we'll give this a try. and I took that as a ringing endorsement. and here's why. It's because every quarter since then, every Googler, every quarter, 70,000 of them today, has written down her objectives and key results, posted them on an internal website, graded them, and then tossed them aside. They're not used for bonuses. They're not used for promotions. They have a higher purpose. They are the collective commitment, the calling of the entire aligned organization. And it's remarkable to me that these have never leaked. This photo of Larry and Sergey, it's on page 5 in your book. But maybe more telling is that the leadership of Google says they can't imagine running the company without this way of prioritizing, setting goals. Remember I said it gets you focus, alignment, commitment, tracking, and stretching. Well, Larry Page is the high priest of stretch goals, of 10x goals. And the way he puts it is, I'd rather have my team aim for Mars, and if they fall short, I still know we're going to get to the moon. So when you grade these inside Google, a really good grade is 70%. If you get 100% of your key results done, you were probably sandbagging. And if you only get 40%, that's another kind of problem. So Google is the biggest, best large company using these.
So if we can see how it works in a large company, can you talk to us a little bit about scaling this down, maybe to the size of a smaller company like some of the people in the audience might be running?
Sure, because what works for large companies can work for small ones too. And I've seen this work well beyond companies. One story I want to tell you is about a remarkable entrepreneur who's transforming the healthcare industry. Her name is Jeannie Kim. Her company's name is Nuna. And they set out to build a better medical claims database for large employers, self-insured employers. Her brother, Kimong, is an epileptic autistic, lives at home with her, and he is a Medicaid beneficiary. So along the way, they got wind of a really historic project being built, a monster effort to make the country's first database ever after 50 years of all 70 million Medicaid members, beneficiaries, and so forth. Her company at the time was tiny. It was just 6 people. What did she do? She didn't blink. She stepped up and said, I'm going to bid for that contract because of Kimong and the difference it would make for all Medicaid beneficiaries, and I'm going to win it. And then when she won the contract, she used OKRs to set her goals, to recruit 60 more people, to meet the security standards, and to deliver the whole project on time, on budget. That story is in this book as well. It's a powerful story because they struggled. When you start using a system like this for setting goals, I say you have to build goal muscle. It takes time, and more than anything else, it takes the commitment of the leaders. But as you suggested, this is not just a system for startups, small for-profit companies or large ones. It can also make a big difference in nonprofits, and I want to tell you one more story there if I can. You'd think that an Irish rock star would be an unlikely practitioner of objectives and key results. But sure enough, Paul Hewson, who goes by Bono, a practicing Catholic, uses OKRs for his nonprofit called One. And they set some really gorgeous objectives, like forgive all the non-performing third world debt, or eliminate mother-to-child transmission of AIDS. And this book tells the key results that went along with it. And there was concern that it would stifle creativity, that people would lose their passion because of this structure. And I think what he has to say about it is particularly compelling. Let me see if I can bring that up here also.
So you're passionate? How passionate? What actions does your passion lead you to do? If the heart doesn't find a perfect rhyme with the head, then your passion means nothing. The OKR framework cultivates the madness, the chemistry contained inside it. It gives us an environment for risk, for trust, where failing is not a fireable offense. And when you have that sort of structure and environment, and the right people, magic is round the corner.
I love this. He says the OKR framework cultivates the madness, gives people permission to fail. And when you have the right people and the right goals, well, magic is just right around the corner. So this can work for large organizations, for startup organizations, for nonprofits. It's not a silver bullet, but it's a pretty powerful system. And those and 9 other stories are in this book. I like to say it's not a business book. It's really a handbook. It's a guide to having your teams do better.
You know, you just use the word love. And when you look at these organizations that have been built using OKRs, whether it's Noon or Google or Bono's Foundation, they're dreams. You know, they're really people's dreams. So what's your dream for OKRs and goals and this effort that you've put together?
Yeah, so I've been called the Johnny Appleseed of OKRs because everywhere I go with Willie Loman, like with my slideshow, I try to share it with people, and they may or may not use it or adapt it. But my dream here is that we can take OKRs. My dream here is that you will join me in this movement, and that we can take OKRs beyond our businesses, even beyond our nonprofits, to some institutions that really matter, like to our families, to our schools, to our hospitals, even to our governments. You can use these to set personal objectives and key results. And the truth of the matter is, I think many of us are setting goals the wrong way. And most of us are not doing it at all. So getting the right goals for the right reason is an enormously important job for leaders to do, and for us as citizens to expect of the institutions we want to rely on.
So you've taken this system, and others have taken it and used it, and you now walk in this valley of tech giants, Silicon Valley, Amazon, Google, these huge companies with what I think now we would argue is really great leadership in most cases. Can you tell us how they got there? Can you tell us the commonality among those great leaders in those giant tech companies?
Yeah, I'd like to do that. And I just want to underscore the point about how important, some would say powerful or valuable, these companies have become. These are ones that Kleiner Perkins has invested in on behalf of the Rice Endowment, I hasten to add. But that's not the main point. I think the point, and this slide's already out of date, is that look at the change between 2010 and 2018 for the most valuable companies. And indeed, this data is already wrong because Microsoft is just now the most valuable company in the world. So I want to tell you a little story about 3 of these, about Amazon, then Google, and then Apple, and how their leaders built their organizations to be super valuable, because there's lessons in there for all of us. You know, most people like to think of, those are the 3, Amazon as an e-commerce giant. But I think a better way to look at it is if it's a very large data center that happens to have some small attached stores to it. The Amazon cloud business now is 2/3 of the market value of the company. And among the many lessons from Jeff's leadership are how disciplined he is in messaging, how focused he is, how he'll seed experiments with a very long view to what matters. Decisions are made around documents called 6-pagers. He won't assume that anyone's prepared for a meeting, so if it's an important decision, there'll be a study hall at the beginning to review those and try to get everyone on the same page. So it's a juggernaut. He's a remarkable, principled, long-view leader. And a company that's, like all of these tech giants, generating a lot more controversy. The basis of antitrust law in our country is whether or not harm has been done to consumers. It's hard to argue that Amazon has harmed consumers, but there is a movement underfoot to say they're just too powerful and therefore we should break them up. It'll be interesting to see how those conversations go. The next story I wanted to tell you about is these 2 Googlers, Larry and Sergey. You know, they had a simple goal, which was to make all the world's information available to anybody, anytime, anywhere, for free. A pretty lofty goal, objective. And then they supported that with all these key results. Larry and Sergey really changed how advertising is bought and sold. Before they arrived on the scene, people put most of their money in television ads. Nobody knew what worked. Prices were negotiated over 3 martini lunches at Madison Avenue. And they said, this is crazy. We're going to change all this. And so they invented this thing called AdWords and said, you only pay for an ad if it clicks through, that it performs. We'll have an auction to figure out what the fair price is. And the winner of the auction will only pay the second highest price, a modified Queen's auction, which the economists will tell us guarantees liquidity in a marketplace. And just last year, online advertising in the US was bigger than television advertising. So I'd say their experiment worked, or this Google thing, it certainly has potential. I'm particularly interested in the effect they might have on healthcare. 4% of the searches on Google every day are related to healthcare. That's 120 million searches per day. Who says Americans, who says people around the world don't care a lot about getting more and better information on their health? But I think my favorite story of all 3 of these has to do with Steve Jobs, who you'll recall in 1976 invented the personal computer. That's when we first met. I was there when he held up the motherboard for the Apple I. And then he announced the Macintosh in 1984, In an 85 at the age of 30, the Apple board fired Steve Jobs. And the company went downhill fast. In fact, they were within 2 quarters of bankruptcy, having cycled through a couple of CEOs when Steve returned. They needed a new operating system, and he staged the largest ever non-hostile takeover of a public company. He got everybody on the board to resign. He stepped in, he had to lay off about half the people, streamlined the product lines, and focused them on the iPod and some simpler computer product lines. I was walking around the neighborhood with Steve one Sunday afternoon. We were going to our daughter's soccer match. And he never did this with me. He pulled this thing out of his blue jeans, and he said to me, "John, the iPhone 1, almost killed our company." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "It has in it 5 radios, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, CSMA, GSM, and another one that I can't think of at the moment." He said, "It's really hard to do that." I turned it over like Tom's doing, and I looked at the back side. Tom, what does it say on the back there?
iPhone.
What's the number?
There's no number.
And in the little box?
8 gig.
8 gigs. I said, "Steve, holy crap. You've got 8 gigabytes of memory in this. It's the first time that had happened. What are you going to do with all that?" He said, "I'll put in 10,000 movies and 100,000 songs." I said, "No, let's have entrepreneurs put programs in this." And he came right back at me and said, "No, I am not interested in having third parties pollute my phone with their applications." And sure enough, in 2006, at the start of the mobility era, there was no app store. So I said to Steve, "If you change your mind, please call back, because I'd like to fund these entrepreneurs." And sure enough, in the spring, around February of 2007, I got a call, and he said, "Come on down to Cupertino. Let's talk about making a fund to fund the apps that'll be available in this app store." So he was strong-willed. He was clear on what not to do. He was clearly open-minded, because he changed his mind. He spun on a dime after he saw the efforts of entrepreneurs to jailbreak this phone. And today there's 2.2 million apps in the App Store, over $100 billion of revenues to entrepreneurs. And that's Steve announcing the App Store and the iFund to go along with it. What do we take away from all this for leaders and for leadership? Strong-willed, visionary, passionate founders who are very clear about what they need to do and not do. They take a long view of their business and couple that in a paradoxical way with a sense of urgency about the present, the here and now. They don't wait for marketeers or polls to tell them what to do. They'll place bets, and they'll stick with things for the long run. I think that's the story of entrepreneurship and the story of entrepreneurial leaders, whether they're in large or small organizations.
So you meet with entrepreneurs, and they hope that Kleiner Perkins supports their endeavors, and you've only got a very small piece of time to make the kind of determination that you just described. How do you do it that quickly?
Well, one of the first things I try to decide is, would I mind getting in trouble with this entrepreneur? Because my experience has been across 200 companies, every time we get into trouble. And after I clear that threshold, then I'm interested in really 2 fundamental questions. The people, who it is they are and how they're thinking about their team, and the product market, because they both matter. I'd say one of the great things about venture capital is you can only lose 1 time your money, which I have done many, many times. But when you have a venture that really works, you can offset those losses. You can make many more times your money. And it's a very hard thing to start a new company. There's lots of entrepreneurs I work with who wouldn't choose to do that job if they had another choice, but they're deeply committed to their vision, their team, and their stakeholders.
So you've given us some great stories about tech history, But what your judgment has developed around is the ability to see forward. And, you know, some people theorize that tech initiatives or tech advances come in leaps, the 13-year tsunami, the big changes where if you get on the top of that wave, you know, you really wind up where you want to be and on the beach. So can you tell us a little bit about that cyclical nature of tech advancement and, you know, how you view that?
Yeah, we did a study. We looked back on this, and it was quite remarkable. I don't know if you'll find it as astonishing as I do, but it looks like technology tsunamis, really monster revolutions, happen in 13-year cycles. And I'm going to take us all back to, 1980 roughly, and show you the start of the first one, which was the personal computer. Not the Apple, but the IBM PC really burst on the scene, powered by Moore's Law. Moore's Law, the doubling of transistors every 2 years, is what made this possible. And for all the kind of credit that Silicon Valley would like to take for its innovation, the truth is, everybody out there, me included, all of us, are benefiting from the incredible power of something that doubles every 2 years. Someone said if that happened to our automobiles, they'd cost a few pennies, we wouldn't even bother to park them because we could replace them, given the economic power there. That's what's been driving microchips. So that's 1980. Fast forward 13 years later, what happened next? Well, Mark Andreessen published the web browser at Netscape Company, a company we were fortunate to back. And suddenly the internet made information free, abundant, and ubiquitous. So from 93 for 13 more years through 2006, we got Amazon, we got Google, we got fundamental changes in the way we live, play, entertain, conduct commerce, govern ourselves, even run our elections. Then we get to 2006. What happened then? Not one, but two tsunamis. The first was this mobile phone. We entered the era of mobility. This phone I'm holding in my hands now is the most profitable product ever created. It made Apple the most valuable company ever in the world. Didn't exist when Steve returned to Apple. But that wasn't the only big deal. The second trend was towards the cloud. And that made computing and storage unlimited, essentially. And I can't imagine the smartphone without the cloud to power it. So 2006, 13 more years brings us to 2019. What's next? Any guesses? Show of hands. Yes, sir. Artificial intelligence. He's got it right, in my opinion. I mean, who knows? But artificial intelligence, a field that's been overhyped for long, witness IBM and Watson, underdelivered. But now I think it's coming back, and it will have profound effects on every field of data, especially healthcare. There's other answers you could give, the blockchain, cryptocurrencies, and so forth. But I'm pretty confident that AI is a profoundly important race. China might win the race to dominate the AI future. We need to change our attitudes towards R&D and towards immigration if we're going to be competitive in this new and important wave.
So what do you think is probably the most promising technological advancement or piece of tech hardware that we have to work with right now?
I think the most important tech innovation is in batteries, battery breakthroughs. I think batteries are the microprocessor of the renewable era. I've backed 6 battery companies. 2 of them have failed already. A third one probably will. But one of them, I don't mean that casually. We're in there fighting for them to win. But one of them appears to have tripled the energy density of lithium-ion batteries, the very best of them. And batteries are not made of rare earth elements, generally. They're made of stuff that's abundant in the ground. So they cost whatever they weigh. And what that means is if you triple the energy density of a battery, it only costs a third of what a comparable lithium-ion one would. And if you look at an electric vehicle like a Tesla, the largest cost item is the battery. Now, if you can cut that to a third of what it was, and furthermore, It's the heaviest thing. That's what you're hauling around. That's a third. You get a kind of compound effect here that isn't a third times a third, almost a 1/10 improvement. It's more like 1/6. But it's profound. It's a game changer. In fact, it would mean that internal combustion vehicles in India would cost the same as electric vehicles in India. And Teslas would no longer be toys for rich boys. It would be the way we move people around our planet, and it would address a major source of global warming gases. So another piece of tech hardware I'm pretty excited about is a breakthrough in LiDAR and radars that'll see further and be cheaper for autonomous vehicles, self-driving vehicles. The electrification and automation of transportation, I think, is a really large, powerful, and optimistic trend for the planet.
So some technological innovations and inventions seem to have promise, but then they fall into a fairly narrow niche. And a good example of that would be the Segway personal transporter.
It's one of my famous failures.
But I mean, it has achieved some promise because it is in these niches where it's doing something that nothing else can do. But it also didn't develop widespread popularity. How do you hone your judgment to avoid that trap?
Well, one thing you should do is be careful about opening your mouth. I forecasted that Segway would be the fastest company to $1 billion in revenues ever because they were bidding on a contract at the time with the U.S. Postal Service to replace 30% of the postal workers through better productivity. They could retire earlier with these Segways. And it turned out the Postal Union wasn't very excited about that. But I think Segway would have been great. They just got the wheels in the wrong orientation. This notion that we would use scooters to get around urban settings, I think, does have a great deal of potential. Segway failed because the product was over-engineered. It was over-designed. It missed its cost mark. And there's a lot more stories to tell about that, but I'll leave it there.
Terrific. So you described to us some of the key leadership indicators that you look for in company leadership. What do you do when you find a person that has a terrific idea that you would love to back, but you feel that they are just not capable of leading that company in the way that it'll achieve what its potential is?
Yes, so what I do, forgive me, is talk with them about it. We have a conversation about what their dream is, what their objectives are, what kind of team do they want to build, how far do they think they can and will take the company. And I never want to deny somebody's ability to grow. Larry Page started as the CEO of Google, and everybody agreed we should bring in Eric Schmidt to be the CEO, develop Larry further, and 10 years later, Larry returned to be the CEO of Alphabet, now Google. So I think it's just a matter of being straightforward, talking it through.
So, changing gears just a little bit, you and Ann have been very generous to Rice in many ways, including her service on the board of trustees and assisting with connections to people of influence. And you've also helped establish the Rice Center for Engineering Leadership and then subsequently the Institute for New Leaders. Why have you chosen to express your generosity in creating leader development enterprises?
Well, I said at the outset, and I think it bears repeating, that I think there's very few problems in our world that can't be better addressed with better leaders. My mantra, it's in this book and in other places, is that I worship at the altar of ideas. I'm a Rice electrical engineer, for Christ's sakes, you know. I'm a technology junkie. I carry 4 or 5 smartphones. All these new devices are really incredible, but relatively speaking, ideas are easy. Execution is everything. I can't tell you the number of ventures, great ideas, that have failed because they can't execute. Ideas are easy, execution's everything. And for most endeavors, it takes a team to win. You may be the lone exception. You may be Einstein and can change the world just thinking about it. But for most of us, we're on teams, and we organize into teams. So I'd rather back people and programs than bricks and mortar. I'd like to empower and unlock, Ann and I both want to unlock human potential. We had the benefit when we were at Rice of being part of an amazing array of leadership experiences and entrepreneurial programs. I'll tell you one more thing. David Lieberman invited me to give a commencement address at Rice. And usually, you know, business people come and they talk about all their lessons learned and their accomplishments and so forth. And instead I asked, could I talk with a couple dozen Rice undergrads? And I asked them what was on their mind. They were concerned about their career, getting a job, who might be their life's partner. And so my talk, a kind of fuzzy version of it is on the web, was all about making these decisions that fundamentally turn on how we make meaning, how love figures in to these. And as I talked with the Rice students, incredibly bright people, I noticed that almost all of them were inarticulate. They kind of looked down at their feet instead of looking at me. There were some exceptions, but these were the best and the brightest. And I thought, you know, you're judged on your ability to think and speak on your feet. What if we conducted an experiment at considerable scale that would involve some training, but most of all some coaching to develop better leaders? I had the chance today to meet with another couple dozen grad students, undergrad students who are part of this new leaders program. They were spectacular. So it's more than an experiment. I think it's a wise bet. But I think we'll see 3, 4, 5 years from now in controlled, measured studies that the Rice undergrads and grads who chose to be part of these various leadership activities are going to be making a bigger difference in the world. That's not to say everybody needs to be a leader, and I think there's lots of leadership styles. Sometimes the best leader is facilitating the group doing well. But the offer at Rice is for every undergrad and for every grad. If you want to be a leader, if you'd like to get outside your comfort zone, we'll find you a customized coach who will meet with you, a professional coach, not some other student, who will meet with you 6 times a year and help you develop your leader identity. That's what's underway here at this great university, and I can't wait to see how it turns out. Listen, pulling this off has been, for me, an impressive accomplishment. First of all, David Lieberman said, this is part of our strategy. I really want to do this. This is not being done at any other university in the world. And then we conducted a more than year-long search with the very best recruiter I know, a global search to find Tom, this amazing leader, West Point general, Yale Business School professor. And he came here and he got the whole Rice community behind the program. It's not a foreign kind of antibody. I'm going to help the drama department or the literature department have better, more successful graduates. And so it's looking really good. And I think it's an important effort. I hope a decade from now, Rice is known as the finest university whose graduates are the greatest leaders in our country and other places around the world, and that our program is copied, that it spreads, that we infect all the other great universities, because, like I said, we need more great leaders. That's the deal.
That's terrific. So if you can imagine just for a moment the perspective on leadership of someone who's really, I mean, they've only been alive 19 years. You know, the vast majority of their political observations have happened in the last 4 years. You know, they haven't had, in all instances, the finest leadership role models in our history. And many of the students that my team talks to are somewhat hesitant to approach the notion of being a leader. What would you tell a young person who may not see themselves as leaders, may not see that as an aspirational goal for themselves, when in fact it's going to help them later on?
So I would say a few things, and these are out of your playbook. First of all, there's many different styles of leadership. Sometimes it's the knight in white armor that's charging over the wall, leading the charge. But other times it's the facilitator at the base of the wall that's helping to boost members of the team over the top. One of my great role models in life is improv. The interesting thing about improv is no one's in charge, and yet everybody in the cast is at risk, and they've got each other's backs, and they're extemporizing as they go along. It's a very powerful social business meme, and one I think that shows that there can be all kinds of leaders. We need diverse leaders. We need more leaders. We need leaders who are dedicated and devoted to teams.
So you've talked a lot about leader flexibility, and you know some of the finest leaders in business and in nonprofits and so forth. Does John Doerr have a leadership style? Do you have a particular way that you are most comfortable leading and being generative with other people's goals?
Yeah, I do. I think I'm enthusiastic, optimistic. I'm a persuader. In fact, our family did a family retreat. Let's look at our different styles of communications recently. And I ended up in this upper quadrant. A couple of my daughters are more analytical, thoughtful, deliberate peacemakers. But I think the way to make meaning in life is through your relationships with others. And my dad was my mentor and role model and an entrepreneur. And I was very blessed when he said, you know, John, we're going to give you one thing, a fine education. No family business, no inheritance, anything of that sort, because nobody can ever take that away from you. And for me, that education culminated at this great university, Rice. And so it's a real privilege to be back here and have so many of you wondering when this is going to end.
You know, one of the things that our team has been really impressed with as we work with Rice students, whether it's highly technical biochemists and physicists to the poets and others on the end of the spectrum, is that they are all creative. I mean, they are all creative. And when we think of OKRs, when we think of a goal-setting strategy that's got some rigidity and measurement to it, we haven't talked much about creativity. Can you explain how OKRs can be used in concert with highly creative people who are coming up with new ideas and may chafe a bit at the structure that OKRs bring?
Sure. So some of the most creative people in organizations that I know fully embrace these because it creates a culture where it's okay to fail. In fact, at Google X in the Moonshot Factory, they celebrate failures. They do everything they can to take on an audacious project and then prove why it won't work so they can free up their resources to go do the next thing, whether it's a self-driving car or a helium balloon called Loon, or what else has come out of that? Self-balancing spoons for people with Parkinson's. It's too bad there aren't great research laboratories, more of them in American companies, the way there were when we had Bell Labs. But it is the case. It is what it is. And we've just got to argue for more R&D funding for great universities. I think Bono put it really well. OKRs can cultivate the madness of a creative organization, give it a purpose, and cause magic to occur. One more thing. This book says, and I haven't talked about it at all, is that OKRs aren't the complete story. If you think of a football game, they're like the goalposts, that's the objective, and the 10-yard markers. Those are the key results as we march our way to that objective. But in a football game, the goalposts and the 10-yard markers are not even the main thing. The main thing there's the huddles, there's the plays, there's the player substitution, there's morale. And so these we call CFRs, for conversations, feedback, and recognition. And one of the chapters here is about Adobe ditching the annual performance review. This idea that the right way to give feedback to millennials is to wait a year, then dredge up all the old emails and write them an out-of-date, backward-looking report. You know what happens when you do that? They quit. So the more modern thing to do, the smarter thing to do, is to have more frequent real-time feedback from your boss, to orient your conversations around these goals, recognize success, and you know what happens? You get better performance. It really works.
So while you were in Silicon Valley, you really saw a transformation of that entire geographic area into a very generative, forward-looking, producing area. We have a number of people from the Houston business community in the audience right now who are interested in Houston playing a much more significant role in entrepreneurship and in particularly tech entrepreneurship. What kind of suggestions would you have, or what kind of observations would you have about Houston going through a similar transformation so that the Houston 10 years from now is a little different than we see Houston today?
So here's what I observe about the great centers of entrepreneurship in our country. And by the way, I think there's never been a better time than now to drive for the development of places beyond Silicon Valley and in Boston and New York. As my friend Steve Case says, the rise of the rest. But in every case where there's been one of these ecosystems built, it's clustered around a great university. And so the people in this room ought to ask, is Rice doing its job? What more? This is David Lieburn's favorite question. What more can we be doing to have Rice be the great university? And then what does it take? Well, it takes entrepreneurs. It takes entrepreneurial capital. Do we have angel funds? Do we have seed funds? Do we have entrepreneurial role models? Do we, who are maybe not in an entrepreneurial business, take the risk of buying products from a startup in the Houston area as opposed to the safe buy, something, say, on Amazon? Have we set clear objectives and key results for developing our entrepreneurial economy? I'm completely convinced Houston can do this, and Texas can do this. I witnessed it. I was part of Compaq Computer. Compaq had the largest first-year revenues of any new company ever. To this point in time, $111 million, founded by some engineers out of Texas Instruments. We can do this. Absolutely, we can. We need a strategy. We need some leaders. We need everybody to work on it.
Can we do it with OKRs?
Yeah, we can do it with OKRs, and we ought to. Do you want to take any questions from the audience, or what's our, maybe not?
Yeah. We'll take one right here.
I was with John at KPRU 45 years ago in Kenneally. John, one of the transforming things that's happening is in education. You think about everything from Khan Academy to
Education, yeah.
just the advanced cloud computing and internet resources. What are you saying to the Rice board about transformation in education? What objectives and key results are appropriate for Rice?
Maybe restate that for
I want to restate the question because everybody can hear it. One of the areas being transformed today is education by technology. John, what are you saying to the Rice board about those changes? I know this. I think the Rice board is more thoughtful about this than I am, so I'm not going to grandstand off this stage and try to tell them what to do. There's no doubt that, broadly speaking, higher education costs too much. It's not accessible to enough people all around the world. And the leaders are finding ways to make their brand and their curriculum attractive and pervasive to the advantage of their programs that are based on campus. My wife Ann is the board chair of Khan Academy. They have like 10 million monthly unique people getting supplemental education. I serve on the board of Coursera, which I believe is a leader in partnering with online higher education, more degreed programs from Carnegie Mellon. Straight up full engineering computer science degrees available for a fraction of what the on-campus program costs. I would say, as David Liebram would say, let's do more. Let's be more aggressive. Let's be risk-taking. Let's be a leader, not a follower. There's another question here.
So my name is ex-vice student. So you spoke about diversity and immigration, and I'm going to, my question is going to go towards that direction.
So what is your question?
So my question is, how can leaders like you engage with the developing world, so for instance, Africa, beyond the lens of philanthropy and aid? So you're a tech entrepreneur. So how do you engage?
So the question is, how would leaders like me engage with the developing world, like Africa, beyond philanthropy, dealing with AIDS, which the one organization, and honestly, the U.S. has done Bush has done a remarkable thing with PEPFAR as a program. And the answer, I think, is invest. Africans don't want aid. They want investment dollars so they can build and grow their own economy and their vision. And I think that's happening. Not fast enough. I'll say one more thing we can do. I think the region of the world that's going to pay the highest price for the generational problem that we've not yet confronted is Africa, and that's global warming. 100 million people in Africa will die of starvation because of extreme changes in climate. They're least responsible for this problem, they're least able to do something about it, and they're just not going to be able to grow food. How our generation comes to terms with the challenge of global warming is a problem I'm deeply concerned about investing in. But basically, I think we're screwed. I think the engineer in me tells me that this problem is the integral of all the greenhouse gases we put out up in the atmosphere, and we better get on it.
So I'll ask the last question. And
okay, so great question. You got the book. What else are you going to do, John, to make people more aware of this? Well, I created a website called whatmatters.com. And I recommend you write that down, whatmatters.com, because it has more stories. And that's a place where we're going to put training materials so you can become a volunteer in this movement. Think of Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In movement. I think the movement to hold our institutions that really matter to us accountable, to make them more successful, whether they're our families with personal objectives or like how we deal with Ebola, is one worth you investing your time in. I think I'm going to, in fact, I know I'm going to do a second edition of this book. The greatest throwaway, without a doubt, is television. But the internet has a lot of power as well. We've sold a couple 100,000 copies of the book. There have been 2.5 million views of a TED Talk about it. And I really didn't write the book to try to sell a lot of books. I just thought it would be useful because I was pretty dissatisfied with how effective my conversations, my slideshow was.
I happen to own one of the best labels for promoting things on the internet, and if you
You know, you can send a note to me, and everyone can for that matter, to john@whatmatters.com. And if you or your nonprofit or something draw up some objectives and key results, you want to email them in, I and a small team of people will offer you feedback on them. I'll just say one more thing about this with respect to families. Ann and I had an objective to have a healthy family, and we read that we read that family dinners have a lot to do with that. And so I set a key result with my team, which was to be home for dinner by 6:30, 20 nights a month, and to be fully present to put these things away. And you know what? That was a really stretch goal. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much. Great job.
thank you.
So I want to thank, don't go anywhere, I want to thank John and Tom, for a truly extraordinary evening. I think, as you've already heard, John and Ann have just had a remarkable effect on our university and what we are able to achieve, and raised our aspirations in terms of cultivating leadership on our campus. And I want to ask Ann to come out, because to paraphrase Hamilton, I was in the room where it happened. And so I can tell you that Ann had every bit as much to do with this idea as John, and Ann now provides this guidance. But I want to make a small complaint and try to correct it a little bit, which is you've really written a wonderful book of stories, and you've reached back a little bit in time, but maybe not far enough. And because I think there's one story that you're missing from the book, and that is, in many ways, the story of Rice University and our extraordinary founding leader, who I am positively sure had an exemplary set of OKRs to launch this university. And so we'd like to take this occasion just so you don't forget in your next book, to present to both of you in thanks for the extraordinary influence that you've had.
Is this Willie Marsh?
No, this is an exact replica of a statue of Edgar Odell Lovett,
Edgar Odell Lovett.
who, as you may recall, William Marsh Rice decided he didn't want anything done until after he had passed away. He passed away maybe a little earlier than he anticipated as a result of a famous murder. But it was Edgar Odell Lovett who basically was a university entrepreneur and launched this university. And we think that is maybe an early story of the power of OKRs and leadership. And we just want to thank you for what you've contributed to us. Thank you very much. Please, in honor of Ann and John Doerr.
Take it.